Welcome to Lento English. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. Listen, relax, and enjoy the journey.
Across the country, many people gathered together. They were not happy with the government. They went to public places in cities and towns to show their feelings. These were large groups of people, and they were called protests. Many different people came to these protests. They had different jobs and lived in different places. But they came together because they shared worries about the government's actions. These people had one main message. They shouted it and held signs with the words "hands off." This message was for the government. It meant they wanted the government to stop doing certain things. They wanted the government to listen to the people. The protests happened when Donald Trump was president. This was his second time as President of the United States. President Trump is a politician. Before being president, he was also a well-known businessman and was on television. Many of the protests were directly about his government's plans and the decisions being made. People disagreed with many of these plans. Another important name connected to these protests was Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a very famous businessman. He is known for his companies that make electric cars and send rockets into space. During this time, Elon Musk was working closely with the government. Some people did not like this. They worried about a businessman having a strong role in government decisions. They felt this was not right. So why were people protesting? There were many reasons. The protests started happening soon after President Trump began his new term in office. Some people were worried about losing their jobs. This was especially true for people who worked for the government. There were plans to cut many government jobs. Other people were concerned about rules related to immigration, people coming to live in the country. They did not agree with the government's rules. The connection between President Trump and Elon Musk was another big reason people joined the protests. They felt these two powerful men were making decisions that did not help ordinary people. On one particular Saturday, the protests were very big and widespread. People organized events in many places. Reports said there were over 1,300 different protest events on just that one day. This shows how many people felt strongly enough to come outside and make their voices heard. This chapter gives you an introduction to this time of protest. It introduces the situation and the main people, President Trump and Elon Musk. We will look more closely at the reasons for the protests in the next parts of the story.
What is the main message people are shouting at the protests? A. Hello. B. More parks. C. Hands off. D. Good morning. The answer is C. Hands off.
2. Many protests everywhere. The protests were happening everywhere across the country. People did not only gather in one or two famous cities. They came together in many different places on the same Saturday. This special day of action seemed to be the biggest protest day seen for a long time. It was certainly the most widespread day of protests since the president began his second term in office. Many people wanted to show how they felt. From the East Coast to the West Coast, cities were busy with people marching. They held signs with their messages. There were large crowds on the streets of Atlanta in Georgia. Washington, D.C., the nation's capital city, also had many demonstrators filling the spaces. Further north, people gathered together in Boston, Massachusetts. In the middle part of the country, Chicago, Illinois, had its own protests. St. Paul, the capital city of Minnesota, was another important place with a very large event happening there. On the West Coast, several thousand people decided to join a big rally in Portland, Oregon. It was not just the very large cities that saw protests. Smaller towns also had people coming out to show their feelings. For example, in Silva, a small town in the state of North Carolina, more than 300 people met together. This showed that people in many kinds of communities, big and small, wanted to join the protests. The message even traveled outside the United States. In Europe, people showed their support. There was a protest event in Berlin, the capital city of Germany. Organizers worked hard to count all the different events. They reported that more than 1,300 separate rallies happened on that single Saturday. These events were all different sizes. Some were very big, with thousands and thousands of people filling the streets. Others were smaller gatherings in local towns, maybe with just a few hundred people. But all these protests happened together on the same important day. They all shared the same clear main message: hands off. This simple message was seen on signs and heard in chants in many locations. Protests took place in every single state, all 50 states of America. In the state of Minnesota, as an example, there were events in about 30 different cities and towns. It was very clear that many different people from many different places felt the need to speak out together. The huge number of protests showed how far the hands-off movement reached across the country and even into the world.
Who are the two important people mentioned in this chapter? A doctor and a teacher. B, President Donald Trump and Elon Musk. C, two famous singers. D, a police officer and a firefighter. B, President Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
3. Why people protested. People joined the hands-off protests for many different reasons. They came from different places and worried about different things, but they all shared one main message. They were against certain plans and actions by the government. They wanted the government to keep its hands off these areas. One big worry was about government plans in general. People felt the government was making bad changes. This included worries about jobs. Many people were afraid of losing their jobs because the government planned to cut many positions for federal workers. Protesters spoke about cuts affecting services for veterans, the people who served in the military. One person mentioned that cutting 83,000 jobs helping veterans was wrong. Some government workers shared sad stories about losing their jobs, even when they were good workers. Changes to the country's immigration rules were another reason people protested. Many disagreed with the government's policies and actions about immigrants. This was an important reason for many people to join the marches. People also questioned why the businessman Elon Musk was working so closely with the government. Some protesters felt that very rich people, like him and the president, had too much control. They described this worry as a billionaire power grab. They thought this was not fair. Many people protested because they feared cuts to important public services. They worried about less money for education and schools. They were concerned about cuts to health care services that people need. People also worried about less support for the arts, like music and painting, and for national parks. Cuts to money for research were another concern. In one city, people protested after a student doing research was arrested by government agents. Protecting people's rights was very important for many protesters. Some marched to stand up for the rights of women and people of color. Others were worried about voting rights. They believed these rights were under attack and needed to be protected to keep the country a democracy. People also protested about threats to workers' rights and fair treatment. There were concerns about less protection for transgender people too. They wanted safety and fairness for these groups. All these different worries about jobs, services, fairness, and rights brought people together. They wanted the government to hear their message. Hands off.
Where did the protests happen? Only in Washington, D.C. B. Only in Berlin C. In just 2 cities D. In many cities. Like Atlanta and Chicago D. In many cities. Like Atlanta and Chicago.
4. Protests in Minnesota. Many people in Minnesota joined the protests too. The biggest protest in the state happened in St. Paul. St. Paul is the capital city of Minnesota. The protest was outside the big state capitol building on a Saturday afternoon. Many people came together there. How many people? Some early reports said 14,000 people were there. Later, the people who organized the event said they counted about 80,000 people. It was a very large crowd. This was the largest protest in Minnesota since President Trump started his second term in January. It was also the biggest meeting of people like this in St. Paul for about 8 years. People came to St. Paul for different reasons, but they shared the hands-off message. They wanted to show they did not agree with the government's plans and actions. Some people talked about why they decided to come. One person, a woman and a person of color, said it was important to be there. She said, "Show up and stand for our rights." Another person explained, "I'm extremely frustrated and we have to be the people to make the change." Some people wanted their children to know they stood up when things were difficult. Some protesters worried a lot about jobs. A man who was a former Marine shared his concern. He talked about plans to cut jobs at the VA. The VA is the part of the government that helps soldiers after they leave the Army. He said cutting 83,000 jobs from the VA was a very bad idea. He believed the country should support its veterans, not cut their help. People also worried about other government jobs. Around 18,000 government workers in Minnesota were impacted by job cuts. One person shared a sad story. They saw good colleagues lose their jobs even though they worked hard. Then that person lost their job too. People also worried about other important things. They worried about rules for people coming from other countries, known as immigration policies. They questioned Mr. Musk's work with the government. Some worried about voting rights. One protester said that voting rights are needed for a country to be a democracy. Others worried about less protection for transgender people. They wanted safety for everyone. Protests did not only happen in St. Paul. People gathered in about 30 different cities across Minnesota on that day. Duluth, another city in Minnesota, also had a protest. Some important politicians spoke at the big protest in St. Paul. Senator Amy Klobuchar was there. Representative Betty McCollum also spoke to the large crowd. They told the protesters they heard their calls and messages. In the city of Duluth, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison spoke to protesters. Many people all over Minnesota wanted to make their voices heard. They wanted the government to listen to their worries.
What were people worried about? A. Too much sunshine. B. Animals in the zoo. C. Government plans and actions. D. New types of fruit. C. Government plans and actions.
5. Worries about jobs and money. Many people at the protests were worried about jobs and money. They worried about the government's plans for the economy. One big concern was about jobs. People heard about plans to cut many government jobs. Some protesters talked about cuts to jobs for people who help veterans. One person said cutting 83,000 jobs at the VA, the place that helps former soldiers, was a very bad idea. He believed the country should support its veterans, not cut help for them. Some people shared personal stories. One person talked about seeing friends at work lose their jobs. These colleagues worked hard and had very good reports about their work, but the government said they lost their jobs because of poor performance. Then, the same thing happened to the person telling the story. In the state of Minnesota alone, about 18,000 government workers were affected by job cuts. These job losses made many people worried and angry. Money for older people and people who need help was another worry. Protesters were concerned about plans to close Social Security offices. Social Security helps older people and others with money. People worried these changes would make life harder. The government gave an answer to these worries. The White House said that President Trump would always protect programs like Social Security for people who should get the help. But protesters were still worried about fairness and having enough money. People also protested against cuts to money for research. In Boston, demonstrators showed they did not agree with plans to spend less money on finding new information and ideas. They believed this work was important for the country. Another big worry was about rich and powerful people. Some protesters in places like Portland called the situation an illegal billionaire power grab. They felt that President Trump and businessman Elon Musk had too much control. They worried that these powerful men were making decisions that were not fair for everyone. Elon Musk was involved in plans to make the government smaller. He said his work was saving people money on taxes. But many protesters felt these changes mainly helped the rich and powerful and hurt normal workers and important services.
Let's learn new words. Protest, noun explanation. When many people come together outside to show they are unhappy or angry about something the government or a company is doing. They might shout or hold signs. The students had a protest because they wanted smaller classes. Gather, verb explanation, to come together in one place with other people. Let's gather near the big clock at 5 o'clock.
6. Worries about rights and rules. The big protests were not only about jobs and money. Many people were also worried about their rights. They felt that important rules for the country were changing in a bad way. Some protesters believed that the basic ideas of democracy were in danger. Democracy means that people choose their leaders and have a say in the government. One big worry was about voting. Some people felt that it was becoming harder for everyone to vote. They said that voting rights were being attacked. They believed that everyone needs voting rights for the country to be fair and democratic. People wanted to protect the right for all citizens to choose their leaders easily and fairly. Other protesters came to stand up for the rights of different groups. Some people spoke about being a woman or a person of color. They felt it was important to show up and make sure their rights were safe. They wanted everyone to be treated the same. There were also worries about rules that protect transgender people. Some protesters said that the government was planning to give transgender people less protection than before. They wanted everyone to feel safe and have the same rights. These worries sometimes felt very real. For example, in the city of Boston, a student researcher was arrested. Federal agents arrested her, and they were not wearing police clothes. This event made some protesters feel worried about safety and fair treatment by the government. People were also worried about workers. Some protesters talked about threats to labor rights. Labor rights are the rights that protect workers at their jobs, like fair pay and safe conditions. They felt these rights were getting weaker. They believed this was part of a bigger problem with fairness in the country. For many people at the protests, these worries about rights and rules were very important. They felt they needed to speak up to protect democracy and make sure everyone was treated fairly under the country's laws.
Let's learn new words. Concerned adjective explanation, feeling worried about something. My teacher was concerned because I didn't do my homework. Rights, noun, plural explanation, things that the law says people should be allowed to have or do, things that are fair for everyone. Children have rights, like the right to go to school.
7. Politicians and official replies. Politicians are people who work in government. Some politicians went to the protests. They spoke to the crowds. They wanted to show they agreed with the protesters or share their own views about the situation. Their speeches were an important part of some rallies. In St. Paul, Minnesota, the protest was very big. Two important politicians from Minnesota spoke to the large crowd there. One speaker was Senator Amy Klobuchar. She works in the U.S. Senate in Washington, D.C. She told the people at the rally that many citizens were calling the government offices. She said so many people were calling that they were breaking the phone lines. This expression means that the phone lines were very busy because many people wanted to share their worries. Another speaker was Representative Betty McCollum. She works in the U.S. House of Representatives. She also said she heard from many people from Minnesota. She told the crowd, "I feel like I've heard from all of you." These politicians wanted to show they were listening to the concerns of the people. Another important official spoke in a different city. Keith Ellison is the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. His job is to be the main lawyer for the state. He spoke at a protest in Duluth, Minnesota. He told people that his office was taking legal action. This means they were using the law to challenge the government's plans. He said they had started 14 lawsuits against the administration. He also said they had won every one of these cases so far. He wanted people to know he was using his power to fight for them. The government in Washington, D.C. and other leaders also gave official replies to the protests. The White House shared a message. This message spoke about programs like Social Security. These programs give money and help to older people and people who need medical care. The White House message said President Trump would always protect these programs for the people who should get them. The message also criticized some other politicians. the Democrats. It said Democrats wanted to give money from these programs to immigrants who were in the country illegally. The White House warned that doing this would use up all the money and hurt American seniors. Elon Musk also gave a statement. People were protesting his work with the government, which included efforts to reduce the number of government jobs. Mr. Musk replied by saying his work was positive. He stated that he was helping to save taxpayers billions of dollars. Taxpayers are the people who pay money to the government through taxes. He believed his actions were making the government cost less money. These different replies showed how politicians and officials saw the issues that made people protest. 8. Looking at the protests. The hands-off protests were a big event across the United States. Many people came together in many different places. They all shared one clear message about the government's actions. These protests showed that lots of people were paying attention to what was happening in the country. People joined the rallies for many different reasons. There was not just one single problem that made everyone protest. Some people worried about their jobs or about money. Others were concerned about government plans for things like health care or schools. Some focused on protecting the rights of different groups of people, like women or people of color. Worries about fair treatment and the rules of democracy were also important reasons for many protesters. Changes to immigration rules and cuts to government services also brought people out to the streets. Even though the reasons were different, people felt they needed to speak together. The number of people who protested was very large. Events happened on the same day in hundreds of towns and cities. From small towns to big cities, people gathered. This showed that the feelings behind the hands-off message were shared by people all over the country. It was not just happening in one or two places. The large number of events, more than 1,300, showed how widespread these concerns were. Many thousands of people participated in these gatherings, making it a very noticeable movement. The protests included many different kinds of people. Young people, older people, workers, students, families, and former soldiers were among those who joined. This variety showed that the issues touched the lives of many Americans from different backgrounds. They felt that important parts of their lives or their country were facing problems. They believed it was important to stand up for what they thought was right. The concerns that people talked about at the protests did not end when the rallies finished. The issues about jobs, rights, government spending, and fairness continued to be important for many. The protests were a way for people to show their worries and disagreements publicly. They wanted leaders to listen to their voices. The hands-off movement showed that many citizens felt a strong need to be involved and to express their opinions about the government's direction.